Welcome to Bookish Mind, Season 3, Episode 4. Today we explore why understanding our own emotions may be the first and most vital step toward mastering emotional intelligence. And this is the deep dive.
Hello. Yes, we're diving into a fascinating set of sources today.
We're taking a stack of materials you've shared with us, really digging into this core idea that getting a handle on our own inner emotional world is, well, absolutely foundational.
That's right. Our mission, if you like, in this deep dive is to pull out the most important insights from these materials to help you become better informed about something really personal, the landscape of your own feelings.
And we're going to jump right in with the concept the sources bring up early on, one that, honestly, it really struck me.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
It's about this fundamental difference between being completely, lost in a feeling, just swept away by it, and simply being aware that you are feeling it.
Ah, yes. That distinction is key.
They use a really evocative old Japanese tale to illustrate this point.
They do. It's the story of a rather boastful samurai. He goes up to his Zen master and demands to know the difference between heaven and hell.
Okay. Bold move.
Very. And the monk just sort of dismisses him, says something like, "You're nothing but a lout. I can't waste my time with the likes of you."
Wow. Talk about provoking someone. Especially a samurai. That takes some serious nerve.
Absolutely. And, well, it worked perfectly. The samurai, his pride completely stung. He was just instantly consumed by rage.
Just furious.
Pulled his sword, ready to strike the monk down, yelling about how he could kill him for the insult.
So, yeah, completely engulfed by that fury in the moment.
Exactly. And this is where the master delivers the crucial insight. He calmly looks at this enraged samurai, still trembling, sword drawn, and just says, "That is hell."
That is hell, being utterly trapped, just consumed by that intense emotion. Wow, it makes perfect sense when you put it like that.
It really does. And the sources point out what happened next. The samurai, maybe just stunned by the truth of it, that his own fury had basically trapped him right there, he visibly calmed down.
Ah, so he saw it.
He saw it. He sheathed his sword, bowed, and thanked the monk for the insight.
He shifted from being the rage to suddenly seeing the rage in himself.
Yes, that's the moment, that dawning awareness, and the monk's final words. And that, pointing to the samurai's sudden calm and understanding, is heaven.
Okay, that's powerful. So it's not about, like, actual places, but internal states of being. That moment of waking up to his own feeling is the key thing.
Precisely. And the sources connect this directly back to, Socrates' know thyself. They argue this specific kind of self-knowledge awareness of your own feelings as they happen is the absolute cornerstone of emotional intelligence.
It sounds almost simple, doesn't it? Like, of course we know how we're feeling right now.
You'd think so. But the sources point out that actually we often don't truly register a feeling until much later, or maybe we mistake one feeling for another entirely.
So this isn't just passively experiencing things, it's something more active, like paying attention.
It is, yeah. Psychologists use terms like metamood, which is just being aware of your own mood, or more broadly, self-awareness. And the sources define this self-awareness in this context as an ongoing attention to your internal states.
Ongoing, so not just a quick check-in.
Right. It's a mode where your mind observes your own experience, including your emotions, neutrally, almost like an impartial witness watching the show.
Neutrally. Okay, like watching yourself from a slight distance, maybe, without getting sucked in or judging it.
That's a really good way to put it. It's described as being similar to Freud's idea of evenly hovering attention. Some call it the observing ego, that part of you that's capable of monitoring your own reactions impartially.
And this involves the thinking part of the brain, the neocortex.
Yes, according to the sources, it specifically requires activating your neocortex, particularly the language areas. This helps you identify and maybe even put a name to the emotions.
Ah, naming them helps.
It seems to. It's an attention that stays neutral, that maintains that self-reflectiveness even when you're feeling intense or turbulent things, rather than just getting caught up and, amplifying them.
It reminds me of something I read in one source where a writer described having a sort of second, calm self, watching his passionate, sometimes depressed self, like a parallel stream of consciousness.
Exactly that. It's described as a slight stepping back from experience, being meta about it, aware of what's happening internally rather than being completely immersed and lost in it like the samurai was at the start.
So the difference is between just being angry versus being angry but also having the thought, okay, this is anger I'm feeling right now.
Yes, precisely that subtle mental shift. The sources suggest this shift indicates those neocortical circuits are actively monitoring the emotion. And they argue that this monitoring is the critical first step towards gaining some control.
Makes sense. You can't manage something if you don't even realize it's happening.
Exactly. Without this fundamental awareness of what you're feeling, other skills, like emotional self-control, become really, really difficult to develop. It's the foundation.
Okay, so self-awareness is the bedrock. But if it's about how we attend to our feelings, do people do this differently? Like, do we all have the same style of emotional awareness?
Oh, not at all. The sources highlight research by psychologists John Mayer and Peter Salovey. They found people seem to have quite distinct styles in how they attend to and sort of navigate their emotions.
Interesting. What are these different styles then?
Well, they describe three main ones. First, you've got the self-aware type. These are people who are generally very conscious of their moods and feelings as they actually happen.
Tuned in.
Very tuned in. They tend to have a more sophisticated understanding of their own emotional lives. They're clear about their feelings, pretty autonomous in how they respond emotionally, and usually enjoy good psychological health, a positive outlook.
And they handle bad moods better.
That's a key point. When they find themselves in a bad mood, they don't just get stuck ruminating on it. They tend to find ways to get out of it sooner. Their awareness actually helps them manage their emotional state.
Okay, that sounds like someone who really learned the lesson from that samurai story. What's the other end of that spectrum look like?
That would be the engulfed style.
Mm.
These people often feel completely swamped by their emotions, kind of helpless against them.
Overwhelmed.
Totally. They feel like their moods are just in charge, which can make them seem mercurial or unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
They're not very aware of their feelings in that meta sense we talked about. They're just lost in them.
Right.
And because they feel so overwhelmed and out of control, they often don't do much to try and escape a bad mood. They just feel stuck.
So they're kind of living in that hell state from the story, perpetually stuck inside the emotion without that observing distance?
That's a good way to think about it, yes. Then there's a third style they mention, the accepting style.
Accepting. How's that different?
Well, these people are generally clear about what they're feeling, so they have the awareness part. But they tend to just accept their moods without actively trying to change them.
Okay.
And the sources mention two sort of branches here. You have people who are usually in pretty good moods anyway, so they don't feel much need to interfere. But then you also have those who are clearly aware of difficult or bad moods, but despite feeling distressed, they just passively accept them. They don't do anything to try and alter them.
So aware but resigned.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
This latter branch can sometimes be seen in, say, individuals with depression who are acutely aware of feeling despair, but feel resigned to it, like there's nothing they can do.
Huh. So just being aware isn't the whole picture. It's also about what you do with that awareness or choose not to do. The self-aware style seems to actively use that knowledge to manage things.
Exactly. Awareness is that necessary first step. But these styles show the different ways people engage with it. And the sources definitely emphasize that the self-aware style is strongly linked to better psychological well-being, largely because it allows for more effective mood management.
Thinking about these styles, it makes me wonder about just the raw intensity of emotion itself and maybe how much people are even capable of being aware of it. Is there a huge variation there too?
Oh, a massive spectrum.
Yeah.
The sources bring in research by Edward Diener, who studied people right at the extremes of emotional experience and awareness.
Extremes. What are they like?
Well, at one end, you have people who seem to feel very little emotion, even in situations that would cause really strong reactions in most of us.
It's like very low key.
Extremely. The sources share this fascinating, almost unnerving story of a college student. He spotted a fire starting in his dorm, and he calmly walked to get a fire extinguisher. Didn't run.
Walk during a fire. That's hard to imagine.
Right. Diener studied him because he was one of the least emotionally intense individuals he'd ever encountered. This student just seemed to navigate life feeling very little about things, even serious events. He's described almost as a man without passions.
Wow. Okay, and the other extreme, super intense.
Exactly. At the opposite end, you have people where even the smallest thing can trigger a really strong emotional response, positive or negative.
Like turning the volume way up.
Way up. The sources give anecdotes like a woman who was apparently distraught for days after losing a favorite pen. Or another time she got so excited about a shoe sale 3 hours away that she just immediately dropped everything and drove there.
So for her, the slightest thing unleashes these big emotional storms, good or bad.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Diener's research also suggested, interestingly, that women generally report feeling both positive and negative emotions more strongly than men do. But regardless of gender, The point is that people who experience emotions intensely and are aware of them can have a very rich emotional life, but maybe also more volatile reactions to minor stuff.
What about that extreme lack of awareness you mentioned earlier? There was a specific condition the sources talked about, wasn't there?
Yes, that's called alexithymia. The term literally breaks down from Greek.
Mm-hmm.
A for lack, lexis for word, and timos for emotion. So a lack of words for emotion.
Ah, okay. So these are individuals who have a profound difficulty identifying and describing their own feelings.
That's it. It's not just that they struggle to express them to others. They seem to struggle to even know what they are internally.
Wow.
The sources quote a therapist describing them as often seeming colorless, bland, saying they bore everybody. That's why their wives send them into treatment. Clinically, they find it extremely difficult to tell the difference between different feelings, or sometimes even between an emotional state and just a physical sensation.
So they might feel something physical but not connect it to an emotion, like butterflies, but not know it's anxiety.
Precisely. They might report their heart racing, or sweating, or a knot in their stomach, but they wouldn't necessarily recognize that whole cluster of sensations as anxiety or fear. They kind of confuse the physical manifestation with the feeling itself.
That must be confusing.
Terribly.
Mm.
The sources share an anecdote about an alexithymic patient who apparently cried profusely after watching a movie but couldn't explain why. She just said she felt awful. The specific nuances, sadness, grief, empathy seemed inaccessible to her awareness. Just a general state of distress she couldn't label.
That must make navigating any kind of personal issue incredibly difficult if you can't even name what you're feeling about it.
It really does. The core issue, as the sources explain it, isn't necessarily that they don't feel anything, but they lack that fundamental capacity to know or put into words precisely what their feelings are. They're almost like the samurai perpetually stuck in hell, but maybe not even knowing its fury, just that there's this terrible internal storm they can't make sense of.
And you mentioned this can lead to physical symptoms. The sources touched on that.
Yes, they're often prone to somaticizing, which means their emotional distress frequently shows up as vague physical complaints.
Like unexplained aches and pains.
Exactly. They might go to the doctor complaining about aches, pains, fatigue, other bodily sensations that are actually physical manifestations of unacknowledged emotional turmoil. Because they lack the awareness to identify the feeling, they mistake that emotional ache for a purely physical one.
What do the sources suggest might be going on here? What could cause this extreme lack of connection?
Well, one proposed cause mentioned, particularly associated with Dr. Peter Sifnios, who coined the term alexithymia, is a potential kind of disconnection. A disconnect between the brain's limbic system, which is heavily involved in generating emotions, and the neocortex, especially the parts dealing with language.
So the emotional signals are firing, but the thinking, naming part of the brain isn't getting the message clearly or can't process it.
That seems to be the core idea. If that communication pathway is disrupted, it hinders the brain's ability to sort out feelings and translate them into words. The sources include a really poignant quote from a novel that captures this. If you could put words to what you felt, it was yours.
Meaning, if you can name it, you can own it, manage it.
Exactly. And for someone with alexithymia, having no words for their feelings means those feelings remain alien, confusing, and ultimately unmanageable.
Wow. This really underscores just how vital that initial step is, simply being aware of a feeling and maybe eventually finding a name for it. It seems so basic, but maybe it's not.
It seems foundational.
Okay, let's transition a bit. We've talked about feeling the feeling, different styles, different intensities. Now, how does this awareness or the lack of it play out in crucial parts of life, like making decisions?
This is where the sources introduced a really compelling and frankly quite heartbreaking case study. A man named Elliot.
Elliot, right.
He was, by all accounts, a successful, intelligent lawyer. Good husband, good father. But then he needed brain surgery to remove a tumor located in his prefrontal lobes.
And the surgery changed him drastically.
Fundamentally. Intellectually, his IQ was fine, unchanged. But his life just fell apart. He couldn't hold down a job. He made terrible financial decisions, lost his savings. His marriage ended. He became paralyzed by trivial details, just unable to prioritize or make effective decisions.
Even though his intellect was intact on tests.
Exactly. Standard neurological and psychological tests showed his memory, attention, logic were all fine. Yet he simply couldn't function in the real world anymore.
So what did the neurologist Antonio Damasio discover when he examined him? What was missing?
Damasio noticed something really profound. Elliot seemed entirely detached from his own emotions about his situation. He could talk about all the tragic events of his life, losing his job, his wife, going bankrupt with complete calm, total dispassion.
Like he was talking about someone else.
Exactly. Like an objective observer reporting facts. There was no sign of regret or sadness or anger or frustration related to his own life story.
So a bit like that man without passions we discussed, but specifically triggered by the brain damage.
Precisely. Damasio concluded that the surgery had essentially severed the neural pathways connecting Elliot's emotional centers, like the amygdala, to his thinking neocortex. His reasoning became purely intellectual, almost computer-like, as Damasio put it.
Computer like how?
He could list pros and cons for any decision endlessly, but he seemed completely unable to assign values or significance to any of those options. Every choice felt neutral. Nothing felt right or wrong, or more important or more appealing.
So he couldn't feel his way to a decision.
He couldn't. Damasio theorized that this lack of awareness of his own feelings, this inability to connect emotion to thought, was the root cause of his inability to make effective personal decisions.
Is there a specific example of this inability to choose?
Yeah, the sources recount how Damasio tried to schedule Elliot's next appointment. A simple task, right?
Yeah.
But Elliot would spend an incredibly long time just weighing the pros and cons of different dates and times.
Agonizing over it.
Yes, but without the agony. Rationally, any time was okay, but he lacked any internal sense of preference. He couldn't just feel that, oh, Tuesday feels better or afternoon is easier. He was stuck in this endless loop of analysis because there's no gut feeling, no emotional signal to guide him towards one choice over the others.
That's incredibly illuminating. It really shows that feeling isn't just some background noise or distraction from rational thought. It's essential for actually navigating choices, especially the personal ones where pure logic just isn't enough.
That's absolutely the key lesson drawn from Elliot's case in these sources. While yes, overwhelming, uncontrolled emotion can be detrimental, the complete lack of awareness of feeling can be utterly ruinous, particularly for those big life decisions, career paths, relationships, major purchases.
Things you can't just logic out.
Exactly. These complex choices cannot be made well through sheer rationality, as the sources put it. They require gut feeling. They require the emotional wisdom we gather from past experiences. Reason without feeling in these really important personal realms is effectively blind.
Reason without feeling is blind. That's a powerful statement.
It is. Damasio calls these intuitive signals somatic markers. Somatic meaning of the body, or, what we commonly call gut feelings.
Gut feelings, somatic markers, okay.
They're described as these signals, often starting in the limbic system and registering physically maybe in your gut, your chest, hence gut feelings that act like quick automatic alarms or green lights.
Guiding you.
Steering you towards or away from choices based on all that accumulated emotional learning from your past, often without you even consciously remembering the specific experiences that created that feeling. So, being attuned to these subtle physical emotional signals, these gut instincts, is presented as fundamental to making sounder personal decisions.
So self-awareness isn't just about understanding why you feel sad or happy, but also about tuning into these quieter, maybe unconscious signals that are guiding your choices all the time.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah, which brings up another really fascinating point from the sources. How much of our emotional life is actually not consciously accessible all the time? It happens beneath the surface.
That's right. The sources really emphasize this. Much of our emotional processing actually happens below the level of conscious awareness.
Yeah.
The initial physiological stirrings of an emotion often begin before the feeling fully registers in our conscious mind.
So my body might start reacting to something stressful before I even know I'm feeling stressed.
Exactly. They describe experiments, for instance, with people who have a fear of snakes. When these people are shown pictures of snakes, they show measurable physiological signs of anxiety like increased sweat on their palms.
Okay.
But here's the thing. They show these reactions even if the pictures are flashed so quickly that they can't consciously recognize seeing a snake or report feeling any fear.
Wow, so the emotional reaction is triggered automatically, unconsciously. It's happening in the background.
Yes, below the conscious threshold. And these preconscious emotional stirrings continue to build up. It's only when they reach a certain level of intensity that they seem to break into awareness, registering in the frontal cortex, and then we become consciously aware of the feeling. So there's this constant interplay between unconscious and conscious emotional processing.
And these unconscious emotions, even if we're not aware of them, can still influence how we act and perceive things.
Absolutely, and powerfully so. The sources give a really relatable example. Imagine someone has a frustrating encounter early in the day, maybe a rude comment from someone or a difficult phone call.
Okay.
They might find themselves feeling peevish or irritable for hours afterward, snapping at colleagues, maybe misinterpreting neutral comments negatively. But they might not even realize why they're in such a bad mood. Their behavior is being driven by that lingering emotional state that hasn't fully entered their conscious awareness.
That explains a lot of those days where you just feel off, but you can't quite put your finger on why.
Precisely. And this is where self-awareness becomes so incredibly critical again, bringing those simmering unconscious or not yet fully registered reactions into conscious awareness,
Mm.
letting them register in the thinking cortex that gives you agency.
How so?
Well, once you're aware of it, you can reevaluate the feeling. You can recognize its source. Oh, I'm still annoyed about that rude driver this morning. Maybe you can then shrug it off, or at least understand it, and potentially choose to shift your outlook or your mood.
So just that simple act of realizing, oh, right, that's why I'm feeling tense, gives you a chance to break free from its grip.
It seems to. The sources are quite clear. This ability to bring these simmering emotional states into conscious awareness is the fundamental building block you need to effectively manage your moods and gain greater emotional control. It all comes back to awareness.
Okay, this deep dive has given us a lot to think about. We've really explored why understanding our own emotions is considered so vital.
Yeah, we've seen that emotional self-awareness isn't just some vague idea introspection. It's a specific skill. It's about paying that ongoing neutral attention to our inner states, like the samurai finally seeing his own fury.
And it's presented as the absolute base camp, right? The foundation you need before you can really build other emotional competencies, like managing your reactions effectively.
Definitely. And we looked at the different ways people engage with this awareness, from the skillful self-aware style to being overwhelmed like the engulfed type or the passively accepting, and how these styles link up with your overall well-being.
We also saw that huge range in how intensely people feel things and how aware they are, from the very low intensity man without passions, all the way to people experiencing big emotional storms, and then the extreme lack of awareness you see in alexithymia.
And crucially, we explored how being aware of our feelings, those somatic markers or gut feelings, seems indispensable for making sound personal decisions, especially in those big life areas like career and relationships where pure logic just doesn't cut it.
Reason without feeling is blind, as they said.
Exactly. And maybe most intriguingly, we touched on how much of our emotional life actually operates unconsciously below the surface, and how bringing those simmering drivers into the light of conscious awareness is the key step towards gaining more control over our moods and reactions.
It really seems the journey towards emotional intelligence, or just better self-understanding, truly does begin by turning our attention inward, just knowing what's happening inside ourselves.
It appears to be the critical starting point.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, what does all of this mean for you, the listener, trying to navigate a world with constant input and complex decisions? Well, here's the provocative thought the sources kind of leave us with to chew on. Given that so much of our emotional life can be active below the level of conscious awareness, how many of your own daily reactions, your decisions, or even just your general moods might actually be driven by feelings you haven't fully recognized or named yet? And what could you potentially gain? What new control or clarity might emerge if you committed to paying just a little more of that ongoing attention to your own internal states?